Hi everyone and welcome to another edition of On The Whistle, the third edition of On The Whistle in a week and the third draw for Sunderland in a week. Do we have to accept at this point that Sunderland are just never going to beat Coventry? I think that's 9 games in a row now without beating the Sky Blues. And today probably actually of all those games up there with the most disappointing and the most frustrating. Maybe you could put the 5-4 back in the League One era up there because of the consequences that had. But Sunderland had complete control of this game at half time. The first half was kind of what we've become accustomed to at home this season. They weren't creating on this occasion loads and loads of chances, but they were clearly the better team. Felt like they had Coventry where they wanted them, felt like they could up the tempo and create more chances than ever they wanted to. 2 incredible goals. One of the actual most frustrating things about the way the game panned out for me today is that we probably won't be able to give those goals the love that they deserve over the coming weeks and months, because Isidore's volley on his weaker foot, first time into the far corner. Watching it live, I assumed it must have been some kind of fluke, that it must have hit his knee or something like that and looped over, but actually the precision with which he scored was so impressive. And then Serkin maybe even went one better. I was speaking to Frankie Francis in the press room after the game, and he mentioned Carlos Edwards' goal is similar to Serkin's, and I think that's a really good comparison, just an incredible hit. Super Kev against Chelsea was the one that sprung to mind for me, just an amazing hit. And you felt like Sunderland were in complete control. The second half just really disappointing. I thought it was a lax performance. I think it's very difficult in all these scenarios, it's very difficult to work out, what was Sunderland's shortcomings and what was Coventry improving. But it did feel like there was the tempo and the intensity was really lacking from Sunderland in the second half. And I think on the balance of the second half, although Sunderland had chances, I think you have to say that, Coventry's goals, both of them, there was no surprise when they happened because the momentum of the game had clearly switched and Coventry had looked a threat. So let's get into some of your questions. Quite a lot of you, I think, are asking questions along a similar theme. So as we go, I might chuck in 1 or 2 together, but we'll come to that as we go. A couple of you basically just asked what happened in that second half. Ian says, what happened in the second half? Cruising along, then bang. Those games will see us and end us up in the playoffs and not automatically promoted. Mark also asking what happened in the second half. A little bit of a sweary part of that question as well, which I won't put out there, but I think you can probably guess the gist of it. Listen, I think for all of us, it's really hard to work out, isn't it, how a team can go from what it did in the first half to what it did in the second half. It's really tempting, I think, and it's hard not to think that a little bit of complacency slipped into Sunderland's game because of how lax they were with the passing and the way the tempo dropped. Speaking to both managers after the game, obviously they're the kind of experts, and maybe I'll try and give you a bit of an input from what they said. I asked the Coventry City boss, said that he felt his team had shown a lot of character in the second half. Certainly felt that they'd shown a lot of mental strength, and they'd lifted their game in the second half. He also said that they'd made some tactical tweaks at half time. I asked him what those tweaks were, and he said that basically what they'd done is they changed their shape in the middle of the pitch a little bit because they felt the press wasn't working, and they'd also got a little bit higher up. They got their centre halves higher up the pitch from where they were in the first half, basically just to try and put Sunderland under more pressure. Now that really tallied with what Lebris said in his post-match press conference, where he said that even though he was really pleased with the performance in the first half, he felt the pressing wasn't right, that Sunderland was struggling to press Coventry's back 3. And what he basically said, he felt the main thing that went wrong in the second half was that Sunderland's ball retention wasn't good enough. So they weren't holding the ball well enough when Coventry were pressing them because they were getting higher up the pitch and they were probably getting their midfielders in more aggressive positions. And I think he basically felt that Sunderland were just giving up control. They were basically giving the ball back to Coventry and they were allowing Coventry to do what they do best. The way he described it was we allowed them to use their strengths against our weaknesses. So if you ask me, it did feel at the time watching it from up in the press box, I felt there was a little bit of maybe not complacency, is too harsh a word, but I felt Sunderland didn't find the tempo that they found in the first half. Speaking to both managers afterwards, they clearly felt that Coventry changed things, that they pressed better and they were more aggressive in the second half. Thought Coventry were probably slightly more direct in the second half as well, and that was effective. I do think Haji Wright's a really good player. Really frustrating. I think that Coventry are a good side. They're better than where they are in the table, and I think that at the end of the season they will be higher than when they are now. I do quite passionately believe that. I think that's really obvious because of the quality they have, and Haji Wright, who I thought was a threat throughout, I think sums that up. What I will say is that Sunderland will never get a better opportunity to beat them. Their 2 centre midfielders, Josh Eccles was suspended, Ben Sheaf, their captain, probably their most influential player, was injured before the game. They've got two of their probably first choice goalkeepers out at the moment. That was the goalkeeper who played. It was his first game of the season and he was ill. Ellis Sims obviously didn't get on the pitch, so even though he was on the bench, he clearly wasn't fit, which is why he didn't feature. They currently don't have a left wing back. Jack Rodoni, who was playing there, was playing out of position. So yeah, Sunderland have let a huge opportunity pass them by. I don't think there's any need to overreact because Sunderland are still top, and there was obviously a lot of positives in the first half and they haven't lost the game, but they've let a huge opportunity go by today, and I think because of that, I think that's arguably one of the most frustrating results of the season for me. Let's have a look at some of your other questions. So Peter says 3 points from 9, not against top sides, injury affected blip or new normal. A little bit of both. I spoke a little bit in midweek, so I won't go over it again, but I do feel that there is a big difference between any team you play in the Championship at home and away. I think that Preston, they had a terrible result against Portsmouth, but I thought they played okay for large parts of that game. QPR, I thought we were okay for large parts of that game at home. Clearly disappointing results and Sunderland weren't at their best, but I do think that it is harder to win away from home. I think there's a big difference. I think you're saying not against top sides. I've said there that Sunderland have let a big opportunity go today. I think Coventry are better than their position in the table suggests. Injuries, I think, are clearly a factor, new normal. I think the reality is that Sunderland so far this season have been a very, very good side away from home. They've been an okay side away from home in terms of performance level. I think that maybe they got slightly more points than some of their performances deserved through the first part of the season. And I think what's happening this week maybe is that they're underperforming slightly. So for me, I don't think there's any need for panic. I didn't feel that we'd seen that many performances apart from a few at home where you're looking at it saying Sunderland are obviously a top 2 side. I think the reality is that they're probably good in terms of the depth of the squad and the quality of the squad. I think they are a top 6, top 8 side. And I think we're just seeing a little bit of variance in the results, to be honest. So frustrated, but not overly concerned. I think Sunderland are going to be a real force at home this season. And I think we've seen enough mettle and enough resilience in the squad to see that they'll pick up points on the road. I do think they have to improve their performances from this week. So I'm certainly not suggesting otherwise. But I don't think it's the new normal. If that's kind of the question, Peter, I think we will see, especially at home. I think we will still see Sunderland win a lot of games. They did have complete control of that until that very disappointing second half. But I hadn't seen enough, or there were little games, certainly the Oxford game, the quality there, that made you think that Sunderland could push for the top 2. I still don't think over the course of the 15 games we've seen a dominant performance level week in, week out that suggests that that's where they are yet. So it's going to be really interesting to see after the international break how they go. That's going to be really interesting passage of games because you've got Millwall, West Brom, Sheffield United. That's 2 of them away from home. That's 3 really, really, really difficult games. Let's see where we're at after that game, Pete. I think those games, it's going to be really interesting. It's going to tell us a lot about the side. So, I've got a question here from Club de Real Naranjas who says, why after being so dominant first half did Sunderland just sit off such a poor side? If you play a low block, fine, but you can't be as passive as we were. Yeah, I was, as I said, I thought the tempo of Sunderland's game, the intensity was well off in the second half from where it was in the first, and I think that was really, really disappointing. At times, we've seen them sit off the season and defend their box very effectively. I think the game against Derby was an example of that. It is something they can do. However, it was really frustrating today, and I totally agree with that sentiment that I think Sunderland needed to be more aggressive. What I would say is that clearly the view from speaking to both managers after the game, it wasn't that Sunderland sat off, they weren't trying to be defensive in the second half. It was that Coventry got in their faces more and Sunderland just didn't play well enough in the face of that. So I'm not sure how deliberate that was today towards the second half. I actually just think that was the momentum of the game flipping. Now, loads of you asked about substitutions. So SR says, hard to criticise Labrie too much, but were his subs wrong today? Feel like Meenda gives so much energy, much more energy up top than Connolly. And does Labrie not trust Alexic that much not to give him 10 minutes? Mark also asked about the subs. Again, Mark's mentioned before, we've talked a bit about Labrie being quite passive with his substitutions. He doesn't like to make a lot of them and he likes to make them a bit later in games. I asked Labrie about his substitutions after the game because it was clear from social media and stuff that it was a big talking point for everyone who'd watched it, certainly the Sunderland supporters. Basically, his view was that he felt that with the momentum of the game and with Coventry on top, it wasn't the right moment to bring on a Watson or an Alexic, a young player. He wanted basically experienced campaigners. I think that it is, I don't think they were the right subs. I think in hindsight, I think that Connolly has been quite effective when Sunderland have been managing games and holding on to a lead. If you think away at Luton, away at Hull, so I can see why you wanted to get him on. The other thing that Labrie said in terms of changing the shape and bringing Ballard on rather than Alexic was that Coventry were being quite direct at that point, and he felt there was going to be a lot of long balls and a lot of crosses into the box. And obviously Ballard's a player who can deal with that really well. So he said he didn't regret the substitutions. The game went how the game went, but he didn't feel it was better to get more experience on the pitch. In my view, I think taking Isidore out the middle was a mistake, because I think he is such a threat on the break, and I think he holds the ball up well. I think he looked a little bit lost on the left, and I think it really Sunderland needed to be a threat on the break, and they needed to be able to make the ball stick to manage that tricky period when Coventry were on top. And I think moving Isidore out to the left basically took away one of their most effective outlets in doing that. So I don't think it worked today. And again, Watson's a really good ball carrier, and I mentioned the other week about him playing off the right. Not quite sure about that. I think he could have been quite effective on the left, so it didn't work. I think it's always easy in hindsight, but I think that the Ballard one made more sense to me, because I think another centre half to deal with the set pieces and the crosses and stuff. I could see why that would be effective. And while Connolly's done that job up front well in recent games, I did think Isidore moving out to the left definitely hampered the side in my view. So I think it's something where the team have obviously got a lot to reflect on after the game, but also kind of the decisions made in the second half from the dugout as well. Dominic, which is an interesting question, said, if Brown and Mundle don't get injured at the same time, do you think we still go on to win the game? Just as a quick update, there's no update on their injuries yet. I mean, Mundle's looked fairly clearly to be a muscle injury, didn't he? Pulled up straight away, which is a big concern because he's been such a good player. I'm not sure. It definitely didn't help, but I thought that Sunderland were struggling at that point, and that really made things unravel even further. And obviously the fact that Labrie then changed shape, I don't think it helped the kind of confusion that was out there on the pitch. But I have to say that the momentum of the game had switched. I do think Coventry were getting more and more on top, and I think Sunderland were poor pretty much from the start of the second half. So I couldn't sit here and say that they would definitely have won the game if those two hadn't played, because if those two had been able to stay on, because I do think the momentum of the game had switched. And I was definitely a factor, but I'm not sure it was the biggest factor in Coventry getting back level. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions from Gail, who first asks about Mienda and what it says for his contribution to the season when it seems that Connolly is preferred. Yeah, I think it's a fair shout. I think that Mienda can probably consider himself a bit harshly done by, given how well he played in the start of the season, not to be the first choice. As I said, Labrie's view after the game was he wanted experience on the pitch, and that's why he went with Connolly. I do think we've seen some good signs from Connolly at times over the first few games that he's been on the pitch, but clearly his sharpness isn't there. And I think in hindsight, it is easy to say that maybe Mienda's fresh legs would have been the better option. I do think Mienda deserves opportunities after the international break, and hopefully another 2 weeks of training, maybe some under-21s minutes as well. We'll see him coming out firing, because I do think he deserves that, because he played so well at the start of the season. And Gail also asked how the team is going to shape up for the Millwall game, which is also something that Mike asked about. So yeah, Labrie has a big problem for Millwall. Hume and Roberts both got yellow cards today. Job is still going to be suspended for that game. So there's 3 players out, no right back. And obviously we have those question marks over Brown and Mundle. So I think what will probably happen is that we'll probably see someone go to a back 3, I think, because I think the obvious one is to bring Ballard back into the team. And I think what will then happen is you'll play a little bit of a sort of a back 4/back 5. It might look a bit different in possession and out of position, and I think you'll see either Mepham or 09 go and play on that right hand side with the sort of the license to get forward when Sunderland have got the ball, but drop in on the right of a back 3 when the opposition have the ball. So I think Ballard will definitely come back into the team. I think when we've spoken to Labrie in the past, when Hume got his 4th yellow card and this started being a bit of a concern, I think he kind of hinted that 09 or Mepham move him out to right back would be the option. I think Alan Brown has played right wing back for Preston and has done so fairly effectively, so that would also be an option if he is fit. Obviously, that's a big question mark. Brown and Robertson are obviously 2 big concerns. I think Watson will play in place of Roberts because I think obviously we've seen that while I prefer him off the left, I think he is the next sort of player to come in on the right. Paveda won't be fit, I don't think, by the time of the Millwall game. And yeah, so my guess is that we'll see someone go to a back 3 and potentially like I say, Onana and Mepham shift out to sort of the right of that back three, and maybe Isidore and Connolly, or maybe Isidore and Meander up front, and sort of change shape that way. But a lot of it, I think, will also depend on, like I say, on Brown and Mundle, and we'll have to wait and see how they progress. So yeah, thanks for all your questions. Really good discussion. I've really enjoyed this. Didn't enjoy the second half so much, but yeah, just keep following all our content over the international break, and I'll be back at some point, no doubt, with another video. Thanks very much for watching, and thanks for sending your questions in as ever.